Hello, friends. It's Ryan here. Wanted to take a quick second while I had your ear to ask you a question. Have you ever felt like you're meant for more? That there's a higher version of yourself just waiting to be unlocked? Well, if so, I've got something special for you. I'm inviting you to join me for Breathe with Cannabis, the Quantum Leap Edition, which is a transformational 3-day online retreat from January 17th to the 19th, where we will be diving deep into what it means to become Human 2.0. This is all about stepping into a version of yourself that leads with love, integrity, and alignment, where you're fully tapped into your mission in life. Over these 3 days, we'll be combining the powers of intentional cannabis use with guided breathwork and proven practices to help you quantum leap into your next level. So don't miss this chance to connect with a like-minded community and experience breakthroughs like never before. To find out more, head down to the show notes, click the link for Breathe with Cannabis, and I will see you all there. Now back to the show. Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Each time I have the opportunity to do a podcast with someone who fills my heart up with joy and inspires me to dig deeper into my mission, I have a blast. And this being said, today's guest on the show is a woman who, although I only met recently, has become a fast friend of mine. And in that, we found a lot of commonality in what we love and how we serve in the world. From her intro into psychedelic medicines such as ayahuasca, to how she's taken the wisdom she's gained from these experiences and found ways to serve it to the world, this episode is one that is sure to leave any of you who are paving your own path in life with the confidence and courage to keep going. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming my dear friend Sofiya Skakri to the show. Sofiya, I am so excited to be joined here today by you. You know, for all the listeners listening, like I mentioned in the intro, Sofiya and I met through the world of Instagram, and we became fast friends. And it's just so amazing to meet people that, live such a different life, but you find so many commonalities with. We live in different parts of the world, or different parts of the country anyway. But we share this love for self-development, holistic health, plant medicine, and especially cannabis and all these other things. And Sofiya has done so many different things to improve her well-being, improve her life, be of service, and all these things. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we get there, I first want to know how you're doing today.
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing fantastic. Any day I get to podcast with someone who's also a battery charger, someone whose smile lights up the room is a good day for me, because that for me is my favorite part of life, is connecting with other people and, hearing their stories and finding commonalities and finding things that I've never even heard of before that allow me to expand my reality. That's the most fun that I could possibly have in life. So I am having a blast.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you. I always enjoy our talks, so it's great to be here.
I'm so excited we finally get to do this, because we met a few months back and we were talking immediately. I was like, I got to get you on the podcast, and it's been so cool to chat in the meantime and, establish so much rapport and see so much of what you're doing and just find common ground, with this idea of psychedelics for personal and spiritual growth, for transformation and healing. And speaking of psychedelics, I'd love to know, right? Because a big part of this show is also like, how did you find your way into psychedelics? Because they were not the mainstream, because they were honestly very dangerous to connect with for a long time, considering the laws and things like that. How did you find your way into psychedelics? Was this something that, you were open to for the majority of your life? Did it come later on in your life? These are what I love starting out these episodes with, because it gives great context for all the listeners on how people find their way into what I would call decentralized worlds.
Yeah. Well, honestly, my first exposure to psychedelics was as a teenager in a very recreational sense, and not in a sacred or special container, and a little wild and recklessly. And they were fun. It was fun. I probably had some breakthrough experiences that I was not aware were breakthrough experiences at the time. But and then, fast forward, I kind of put all that aside. And then about 10, 12 years ago, I was doing my yoga teacher training, and my teacher there expressed that she had been to an ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica. And we talked about it a little bit. She thought that it might be something that I would be interested in because we had a lot of common interests. And I knew immediately that my interest was piqued. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I had got chills. And I was like, this is something I need to check out. But I also knew that that was not the time. And it took about 5 years for me to be able to align into the right time and space and find the right person to serve. And so what was this? Maybe 2019, I think, was my first sit with ayahuasca. And I'd dabbled a little bit with psilocybin since then, in the interim, but not much. So my first big, real deep dive into psychedelics, in a more healing container and in a focused sense with like an actual intention behind it, was to sit with grandmother ayahuasca in 2019. And immediately, it was one of the roughest experiences I'd ever had in that moment. But I was also filled with such gratitude and wonderment that I wanted more, and immediately started sitting with more medicines and attending every ayahuasca ceremony I could, and immediately inserting myself into a place of service, because I just wanted to be part of it. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to literally present myself to be of service to not only this medicine, but these medicines. And I've had a long-standing relationship with Santa Maria, or cannabis. Again, that relationship has woven in and out from recreational to medicinal to an abuse medicinally, where I wasn't really being conscious of how I was using this medicine, and circling right back around to now we're in a better place and we have a more attuned relationship with the medicine of Santa Maria. And I treat her with more respect and as a sacrament and not a drug. And it's just such a beautiful transformation to be able to shift the perspective when you really see and dive into what these medicines can do and what they're capable of, and their history, their rich history of how they are used as a sacrament, and in more of an entheogenic sense, as opposed to this, numb yourself sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. I totally agree with that. It's funny because recollecting on my own journey, there were many years I first did anything other than cannabis when I was 23. I tried MDMA at a rave, which was really fun. And also, it illustrated to me something very powerful, which was it showed me something was going on with my dad, but I didn't know what that was until I got home. I was in Vegas when this happened. And when I got home, I had realized, or my dad had informed me, that he got diagnosed with cancer. So it was very interesting because then I was in the middle of like 50,000 people, having a good time. All of a sudden, because I had never felt this medicine before, all of a sudden I just felt a really deep feeling to my dad, not my mom, specifically my dad. And I'm close to, very close to both of them. And it was just very interesting. Like that was the first time that I had been like, whoa, okay, that was more than just having a good time partying, And so then, because of that experience, when I tried mushrooms the first time, I kind of understood like, okay, these are getting into a realm that I've always known existed, but I didn't really give much awareness or attention to, which I now call the realm of spirit or the realm of God. But it's interesting to see how even those experiences back then, they were fantastic. I don't regret them or whatever. But how even back then I was having certain experiences where I was seeing a little bit more to the full picture, but I wasn't ready to kind of like, really like invite myself into that world. And then, getting into a lot of the more spirituality and intentional, living and everything I've got over into the past, like 8 years, it's amazing to see how the medicines have opened up more for me. It's almost like, if you haven't passed 9th grade, you can't go ahead of 10. But maybe if you're a really smart genius kid, you can hop a couple grades. So it's kind of like that, where I don't know if I ever felt ready for some of the biggest experiences I had, but because I had them, I can understand or imagine that I was ready on a spiritual level. But, at the end of the day, back when I first started doing them, I wasn't ready to see the full picture. If I had seen the full picture then or experienced more, it might have freaked me out. It might not have been the right time. I might have got traumatized, whatever might have happened. But it's amazing how those sides of the medicines can show themselves exactly when you're ready. It's kind of like when the student is ready, the master will appear. Right. Very interesting.
It sounds received a couple of initiations that maybe you had no idea were even coming.
Yes, 100%. I've talked to a lot of people about how psychedelics are kind of a stand-in for a rites of passage for human beings these days. And that's exactly what they felt like to me. Like I was never the same again in a very positive way after the first time I ever took MDMA or psilocybin, et cetera. And almost every time I take them, I'm not the same again. I'm more of who I really am and less of who I thought I was. I'm curious, does that experience happen to you as well? Like more of who you really are, less of who you thought you might have been going into that experience?
Going in, yes, but more coming out for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, like this is who I really am. I remember. And this sense of embodiment of this being that I am and always have been for lifetimes. But we don't always remember who we are in this time, and so it's these moments, it's these like magical little sprinklings from the medicine that remind you of who you are and what you're here for and how to do what you do. I don't know about you, but I often experience these moments of doing something, like creating something or going through the steps of doing something and not knowing, like, I have no idea how I knew how to do that or even like to be able to explain it to you. But I know how to do it and I did it and here it is. Like, remembering this thing that I did in some other, lifetime, some other timeline in some other century. But I don't know how I did that.
What is up, everybody? I hope you are enjoying this episode of my dear friend Sofiya, and I wanted to take a second while I had your ear to ask you all a question. What if I told you the life you're living now is only the beginning? What if you could step into a version of yourself so powerful, so fearless, and so radiant with love that you inspire everyone around you? Well, this is what we are calling Human 2.0, which is a life led by love, not fear. A life of breakthroughs, courage, and deep purpose. Join us January 17th through the 19th for the Quantum Leap edition of Breathe with Cannabis. We're doing a 3-day online retreat designed to help you break through the barriers holding you back and awaken the Human 2.0 within. Through transformative breathwork and the conscious use of cannabis, you'll learn to let love guide you, dissolve your fears, and become the inspiration you were born to be. Now, this isn't just a retreat, it is a transformation. Spaces are limited and your Human 2.0 is waiting. Reserve your spot today by heading down to the show notes and signing on up. Excited to see you there. Now back to the show. I totally agree. That's what podcasting / conversation / connecting with other people as a whole is for me. It's that exact same thing. It's like, it took me a long time to realize that not everyone was able to connect with people very easily. Like when I was a kid, there was a lot of things that I couldn't do that well, right? Like I wasn't a good skateboarder like a lot of my friends were. I was okay at biking and rollerblading, but my friends were way better than me. But, again, at that age, I didn't realize, my parents were very cool with letting all the kids hang out at their house. And so I always had 20, 30 kids that were around that were always looking to hang out, and chill and do whatever. And it wasn't until I got older and I started to get into school and things like that I realized, oh, that's not the way that everyone is. And then especially since meeting Rachel, and I've been with her for 7 years now, since meeting her and, of course, when you're in an intimate partnership, you get to really like take your armor off and, get curious about how people, who people are and how they live their life up until when they met you. And so like just hearing her upbringing of all the anxiety she had around making friends that was kind of put on her from her mother because her mother had challenge making friends because she moved around a lot when she was a kid. So because of that experience her mom had, her mom was always very worried that she wouldn't have friends. So the things that she would say to her and things that were from a really good place of intention, But how those things played out in Rachel's life then allowed her to believe, oh my goodness, like what if I don't have friends or whatever? And it's just interesting to realize those thoughts have never entered my head. Many other times I've been like, oh my God, what if I'm never good at this or whatever? But with that one area of my life, it's almost like I came into this world already with that stat up, like cranked up if you're playing a video game. So it's interesting how those things happen. And since I've tapped into podcasting and coaching or whatever, it's almost like the feeling I get intuitively is almost like, I'm back where I've been for many, many lifetimes. Like this is all I've ever been, is this role. And I feel very comfortable in it. And of course, like every lifetime I imagine anyway, it changes a little bit in what you're doing or the vocation you're doing or how you communicate or whatever. But it feels like communication to me is something that has been like hundreds, if not thousands of lifetimes deep at this point. So yeah, I totally feel that.
Yeah. I've been going through this thing a lot lately, and it seems a lot of people have. So I'm kind of curious, like, what your thoughts are on this. But just realizing so many of the learned, programmed ideologies around different aspects of life. And as I'm realizing these like really programmed notions that are not necessarily the way that they should be, could be, or need to be now, maybe they were necessary a while back, but things have changed. And anyway, so I'm realizing all of these patterns and learned ways that I'm really having to unlearn and reprogram myself. And that's been fascinating and challenging.
Yeah.
And like almost every day it's something new. And there are some that are a lot more difficult than others, to really set
Undo.
in. Yeah.
Yeah. Or redo, I guess, is a better way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally feel that. I mean, there's so many things, almost everything I feel like. I mean, fortunately enough, like, I found people like you, I found people like, other guests I've had on the show that made me not feel so alone in it. But, even the idea that we must age as the years in our life go by is something I've been getting into. Like, why do some people look so young as they get older while other people look older even when they're young? Like, why does that happen?
Right.
And I think I told this story a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, so forgive for the listeners, but I'm going to tell it again. There was this experiment they did in like the 90s, the CIA did, where they took people that were in like their 70s and 80s, different ranges of, failing health, walking with walkers or canes or whatever. And they made a simulated town that was set in like 1937, something like that. So, for these people, when they would have been in that town, they would have been like in their prime, 20s, 30s, et cetera. So when they put them back into this town where the TV shows, the furniture, the cars, everything was as if it was 1937. It was sometime in the 30s. But when they did that, they realized that all of a sudden these people stopped walking with canes or walkers. They started being able to sit in positions they weren't able to sit in for years, and they didn't have to do anything. They weren't going to rehab or whatever. All of a sudden they just started de-aging. So it's very interesting to think about, like, even that level of programming is still programming, that we must get older as we age. And how it's played out in my life, with some things that are a little more approachable, because that one still I got to wrap my head around. But, again, like things like having to pay taxes, right? Taxes are actually voluntary, but most people just go along with them because the next person says go along with them and that person's dad says go along with them. So we don't really question these things. How to run business and what to do for a job. The whole age-old myth of like, just get something that, will give you money. But then realizing most people don't really live a life worth living, in my opinion anyway, when they choose that and happen to break through that, metaphorical ceiling and whatnot, all these things. I feel like the world is going through a lot of those shifts right now. I mean, healthcare, look at how much that's been decoupled in the last 4 years. I mean, that alone is insane, let alone all the other areas. We can look at the food supply. We can look at, like I said, like the online stuff. We can look at finance with crypto coming in and whatnot. It feels like almost everything is having a toss up right now. And it's really fun. It's a great time to be alive, but it is a big wave to surf. And it's challenging to find safety in that, like that's like kind of the argument, if you will, for me anyway, why I do the things I do to make sure I'm grounded every day. Cause it's a wild world out there, but yeah, I totally agree.
I find too, that's a lot of where some of these medicines really help is, not so much bringing you the answers, but helping you find the questions.
Yeah.
The answers are all around us. The answers are everywhere. You just have to know like what to ask and where to look.
Yeah.
And I find that so much of the work with these medicines, with these entheogens, is to, first of all, clear out all BS, like just get rid of it. And then you can like really sort through and pick through and clarify what's what and what's going on. And so once you're able to kind of sort through the debris of the clutter, so to speak, really these medicines can really help you, particularly ayahuasca, but lots of them can really help you discern the questions of, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? One of the biggest answers that I keep getting in nearly every ceremony, no matter what it is, and for 5 years now, is so simple. You don't have to be right. You just have to be love. All comes back to love. It just comes back to being love, being compassionate, finding grace, and fuck being right. Sorry. Hope I can say that on here. But
no, you totally can. You totally can. Let it rip. Let it rip.
I mean, there's a certain level of being right, but it's just about being love. There's always some common ground. So yeah, I don't know where that's round to.
That was perfect, because when you were saying the answers are all around, you just got to find the right questions to ask. What hit me was a quote that I heard way back, and it's so funny because I was just talking about this with a client of mine today. He asked me, like, when did you start getting into listening to podcasts? And so I talked to him about when 2017, I found a podcast called the Positive Head Podcast with this guy, Brandon Beecham. Great podcast that introduced me to so much amazing stuff. But one of the quotes he would always say is, love is the answer. Now, what was the question? And it's so true, right? Like, wow. That really is it. And those are the kind of things that, like, you can hear and it's like fun. Like even me saying it now, it's like fun. And I get it logically. But when you're in a psychedelic experience and that dawns on you and you're like, it's all love. It's hilarious to you. And that hilarity can turn into tears. It can turn into all different types and shapes and sizes and whatever. But at the end of the day, it's so true. Rach and I were driving down to Virginia probably about a month ago. And, I'm a big fan of Hermetic law, Hermetic principles and whatnot. They really help me. They're like, good governing rules of the universe. And, the one as within, so without, right? And the whole idea that there is no objective reality that quantum physics talks about. So Rachel, she was kind of in her own world in the passenger seat, and she goes, there is no right or wrong. So if you want to be right, you're wrong. And I was like, that's a good statement. It's like one of those like haikus in a way, but it's so true, because really like how I took that in is there is no objective right or wrong. Right or wrong don't really exist. They exist in this illusion, this dream, as some might call it, that we quote unquote live in, right? That we're visiting, that we're dreaming into existence. In this dream, duality is perceived as real, right? Subject, object, black, white, up, down, hot, cold, all these things. But in reality, they're all like, if you look at hot and cold, for instance, that's the same spectrum. They're just opposite polarities. So at the end of the day, it's not really a duality. It's more of like a differentiality between two opposing poles. And so if you look at like the idea of oneness, well, if our truth is oneness, then how could our truth also be somethingness? Which is like what I think of this realm as. So that whole idea of like, there is no right or wrong. So if you want to be right, you're wrong. It's so true, because at the end of the day, like if I love the color blue, right? And my favorite color is blue. And I say, Sofiya, my favorite color is blue. And you go, cool, my favorite color is purple, right? That's beautiful, right? Because we're both right for our subjective view of this dream. Where the challenge comes is when I think, no, I have to convince Sofiya that the best color is blue. That's where things get kind of weird, right? And so, again, I have a lot of compassion for a lot of people in the world, because I remember when I was in that state of consciousness where I thought I had to argue my subjective truths to believe them more. But at the end of the day, I'm at a point now where I understand that if I truly believe something, like if I believe, I'm going to throw out a random example here, right? Because I have a lot of flat earth friends. I don't dive into that whole thing, but it's a trigger happy subject, so I'm going to mention it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if I believe the earth is round, right? And a friend of mine believes the earth is flat. Well, if I really believe the earth is round, I shouldn't need to argue my point whatsoever. If anything, I should actually be excited to hear why he thinks the earth is flat. And we should be able to have a great conversation around that. That isn't based on trying to change each other's minds, but it's based in curiosity. But I think the challenge happens when, say, if I believe the earth's round and he believes the earth's flat, and I go, no, you have to believe the earth's round. that shows me that I don't really believe the earth is round, and that somehow my safety is wrapped into my identity as someone who believes the earth is round. So in a way, if that comes up for me, I get to thank that person who, displayed an opposing view, because they just showed me where I didn't really believe my own truth that I was trying to state as my, objective truth, So that's one of the things that I've really come into understanding, and I fall out of it from time to time, right? And I remind myself, because life is just a big series of remembering and forgetting again. But yeah, I love that idea. It's so true to exactly what I believe as well.
Absolutely. And, kind of that comes also back around to, it's all about perspective.
Yeah.
What's right from this perspective might be wrong from that perspective. It just depends on how you're looking at it and what the circumstances are from where you're at, because they look completely different, and that is subjective in some areas, but.
What is up, family? I wanted to take a second while you're tuning in to tell you about an amazing new product I recently began using. Now, you guys know I do ads very rarely, and my promise to you is that anything I speak about is something I personally have found value in using regularly. Well, recently, I came across a company called Brain Supreme, who sells microdoses of mushrooms mixed with adaptogens, nootropics, and other additions as well. And even though I've microdosed off and on for years, I have never felt results like these. In only 2 weeks, I'm sleeping better, I have far less mind chatter, my ability to perform has exponentially improved, and best of all, the sense of inner peace I've been feeling is like nothing I've ever experienced in microdosing before. Right now, you can get 15% off of any of their products when you use code SPRAGUE15 at checkout. And to find out more about them and grab some for yourself, head down to the show notes for this episode and begin your journey into microdosing today. Now back to the show. Oh, it's so true. Because if you think about it, I've been really diving into A Course in Miracles, and I got into it from this book, Disappearance of the Universe, which I highly recommend to anyone who loves this kind of stuff. But, in there, they talk about that there's really just one dreamer. They call it the son of God. It could easily be the daughter of God. Gender is interchangeable there. But, it's kind of like a part of God dreamt a dream in which there was no God, or that there was something else other than God. Put it that way. It's a better way to say it. And that part of God forgot it was dreaming. But it's still God, and God is also still where God's at. And this dreamer has made a very convincing reality, right? Because this is the ego's realm now, this other than God, right? That created the ego, which is finiteness when God is infiniteness. And so, when you think about it, there's only one dreamer, but it's making it very convincible by making us think there's 8 billion so odd different dreamers here and all these different animals and different life forms and whatever. But really, it's just one dreamer dreaming this all into existence. Then isn't the point of being here in this experience, since we are here, so we got to imagine it's for some kind of good reason. But I would imagine anyway, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, that the beauty of life, or this experience we call life, is actually the differentiality, is an understanding there is no objective right or wrong. And that even again, if I think blue is the best color, am I right or wrong? Well, subjectively, that could be right, but objectively, I'm wrong, because other, dreamers or other illusions of the dream could think that, there's a different color that's the best color, So it's interesting to see that, I've really tuned into just how beautiful all the differences are, even in politics, for instance, right? Which is like a big thirst trap. And I don't play in that field because it takes a lot of energy. But it is kind of beautiful to witness people fighting for what they feel is right on both sides, And, again, I understand the hero's journey. I understand the fact that, even though I may not, enjoy politics, I'm grateful someone else does. They found some kind of love in it. I don't pretend to understand it, but they do. And that's all that matters. I don't need to, understand why they do and I don't. I just follow my fun. And that's I think as simple as it can get. Just follow your fun. That's what kids are doing, and they're the closest to God that I've ever found anyway.
Find your joy and keep following that. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think the biggest thing that so many people forget, and you remember more quickly along this path than not, but is that we're all God. We all are the divine creator within.
Yes.
And we're here for a reason. We chose this reality. We chose everything about this reality. And there's no real point in searching for how to get to heaven. This is heaven. We are in heaven. You just have to figure out how to see it that way. Like, how do you shift your perspective to be in heaven right now? Because we are in heaven on earth. Just doesn't always look like it or feel like it, but it's, you're the divine creator of your own reality, and we are experiencing heaven on earth right now. We chose this.
100%. And it's so important to remember that too, because, if we like the challenge that I've gone through in my life that I won't project on anyone else, but I can imagine this is what other people go through based on my observations, is that we are so powerful. The analogy I give here is kind of like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, if you've ever seen that movie, where Hagrid brings them to Diagon Alley. And so they go into the wand shop. And he's still trying to wrap his head around this idea that he's a wizard. So he doesn't see his own power yet, right? Very similar to a lot of us before we've gone on this waking up journey. So they hand him these wands, and he's like, I don't know, just doing this with it. And shit's blowing off the shelves. It's chaos, But again, like, that's his power, right? And I think that's where a lot of us are at before we become conscious of it, is that we'll say, why does our life suck? Or why am I getting these terrible results in life? Not realizing that we're the one casting the wand. We just haven't realized how to do it intentionally and consciously yet. And until we take accountability for all the perceived negative stuff, which again, I don't really believe is anything objectively negative, but the things that maybe we don't like in life, this was when I had my Kundalini awakening, when I took full accountability over the fact that the job I was working at, I didn't like. I was staying there. No one was forcing me to be there. I could leave at any point, but I didn't feel empowered enough to go out on my own yet. So I was blaming them for keeping me at this job, when in reality, it was just I didn't want to take accountability for the fact that, like, it would have to be me recognizing that I had kept myself there. But once I recognized that, I also got all my power back, because I realized, well, if I've been keeping myself here, I could go anywhere, And so, like, I think that's kind of what we're going through in the world right now. It feels like is a lot of people are waking up to that, where some people haven't yet. And it's creating a certain type of divide in the way. And I think that's beautiful too, because for all we know, the people that aren't waking up, that's their perfect lifetime this time around,
Right.
Maybe not everyone's meant to wake up this time. I mean, I think it would be silly to think everyone's meant to at one time. And maybe we've gone through millions of lifetimes where we've been completely asleep, drinking the fluoride, doing whatever it is, right? So I always have compassion for anyone in their journey, because even people that, maybe could be classified as asleep or not awake or whatever, they can give you a lot of wisdom. And in that, when you get that wisdom and you wake up, you can revert back to them and potentially help them. And so it's this beautiful reciprocity that Ram Dass talks about, of all walking each other home. And just beautiful. That's what you're talking about. Like, it just comes back to love every time. Just love everyone and see the God in them, see them all as God in drag, which is one of my favorite statements ever.
Favorite quote too. Yeah. It's been really beautiful, though, witnessing friends and acquaintances waking up, if you will, and realizing that, like, they don't want to continue the grind that they've been in just because, like, it's the job that they had to have to pay the bills, but they're really, like, tapping into more of their creative side, or what their what more of a calling is for them, instead of, like, punching the clock to get the paycheck. And it's been so lovely, not only to hold space for people as they figure these transformations out, but to, like, witness them literally walking through it and making these changes of, like, quitting the corporate job, quitting the teaching at a university, so that you can, like, grow the apothecary and make the tea blends and, roll handmade incense and, like, develop these beautiful creations that, like, we're here to create. We're not here to work a 9 to 12, like 9 to mid job, punching a clock and collecting a paycheck. And, this world is way too beautiful to be sitting inside and not creating. So anyway, it's really such an honor and a privilege to be able to witness and hold space for these people as they move through these transitions of life, and like, give up, surrender to what their passion is, to what their calling is, and really, like, go out to be their truest, most authentic selves, and leave the corporate job. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and there's a certain need for that, but that is not my place. And
Agreed.
so
Not my place either.
it's lovely to be part of the movement of shifting into the more, back into the creative realms.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. Like, I know for me, I was never meant to be anything corporate, like, it was very weird for the first, like, I would say 16 to 17 years of my life. And it was definitely weird after that too, for quite a few more years. But when I was 16, 17, and I found cannabis, and then I started getting into conspiracy theories, I started to realize, oh, there are other people that are very different from the people that I've met so far in my life. And I'm grateful that I did have a lot of friends that were like that. We were just all young and we didn't really know where to look, but once I tapped into that, I found a lot of my friends that I had grown up with were into that kind of stuff. And, I'm grateful that I'm still very close with all my childhood friends, like, except for maybe a couple here and there that just, did their own path or whatever. We've all stayed pretty close. But at the same time, like, I've witnessed, and again, this is just my interpretation of what they've told me, but, I've witnessed a lot of them just choose like, just rather just go get a paycheck and come home and play video games. And that's okay. Like, I don't judge that, again, maybe that's perfectly divine for this lifetime for them. But it's allowed me, when I've seen that, the feeling it brings up in me that I don't pretend to think is their feeling, right? It's just like what it brings up in me is like, whoa, like every time I see someone do that, even if it's the perfect decision for them, it reminds me of how much that's not what I want to do. And when I find people like you or my buddy Aaron Abkey or Christopher August or any of these people that I, resonate with a lot and hang out with a lot, it's like, this is exactly where I parked my car, like exactly what is meant for me. And I think that's why I like psychedelics so much. And I'm interested to see if you found this link too, because this is just a theory I have. But, like for a lot of people, psychedelics are very terrifying. Why? Because they kind of throw up everything you thought reality is. But for those of us that have always had an inkling that this is not what things are supposed to be like, I find that we actually find some sort of safety within the uncomfortability of psychedelics because we're getting to embody and experience everything that we've already known we haven't been, but maybe we haven't seen exact evidence in the world yet. And maybe we start to find other people that are like us. But, we find like safety there where other people feel very unsafe in that realm. And I think that when you look at like entrepreneurship, for instance, that's a very like psychedelic experience, right? I need to make $1,000 by tomorrow. How am I going to critically think and make that happen, right? Like there's a lot of things that will come up in a psychedelic experience that you didn't know were going to happen. And so I find this interesting link between entrepreneurs and psychedelics versus like people that maybe work for someone else and the lack thereof psychedelics. Have you found a link between people that enjoy psychedelics also being someone who's paving their own path or entrepreneurship or in some way, shape, or form living their life very differently than most people?
Yeah, for sure. And the first thing that comes to mind with that is that the majority of that grouping of people that you're referring to is that we all seem to be risk takers.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's like the first thing that hits is like every one of those people, classes of people, categories of people, we're all risk takers. We're willing to like take a risk, do the the edgy thing, like not do the normal thing, and there's a certain comfort in that, although in that realm, as far as psychedelics go, I find that it's maybe pushing that edge and learning to navigate the discomfort is a more colorful and somatic experience of meditation.
Yes, 100%.
Because you can also get that experience in like sitting in meditation, but it's just going to look different and feel different probably. But, you can absolutely get to those points of discomfort. And like, that's where you navigate. Like, how do I become comfortable with this uncomfortableness? Mm-hmm. And it's very similar in psychedelic spaces. How do you become comfortable with that discomfort? Whether that discomfort is facing this shadow, this darkness, this demon, this whatever it is that you're facing, or the physical discomfort of like, having to purge either northern or southern, and, just the discomfort of realizing body aches that are like moving through you, which is sometimes how you purge is, it may not come up or out. It might move through in different ways. And so, yeah, there are those aspects of discomfort. But this grouping as a whole are bigger risk takers, I think, and are ready to like jump off the cliff and figure out if the bungee cord is attached halfway down.
I totally feel that. The word that came to me is intensity as well. Like I've been aware that I enjoy intense things in life. And this is not like an ego, like, I enjoy intense things. It's just something that I've realized over time. Another way I would say it is I find some semblance of enjoyment touching hot stoves, or rather figuring out for myself just how hot a stove is. Someone may tell me, hey, that one's a hot stove over there. I'm like, okay, let me go see how hot. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, shit, that was really hot. But sometimes I'm like, it wasn't as hot as I thought it was going to be. And I think like that curiosity, right? To be like, no, I mean, you told me that, but I don't know that yet. I think that's like the ultimate curiosity stemming from God, because if someone else, I mean, look at the people who do fire walks, right? Like, is fire hot? Most of us would say yes. Will fire burn you? Most of us would say yes. But what about the people that can do a fire walk and not get burned, right? Like, what's going on there? Now, again, we can understand based on what I think most listeners of the show understand with Joe Dispenza stuff and whatnot, that we can create a reality. But at the end of the day, it makes you like realize, at least it did for me, and I imagine for you and many people listening as well, that like if I thought fire was going to burn me no matter what my whole life, and then I find an example that it doesn't every time, then how do I know that even if I ate that food last year that I'm not going to like it right now? How do I know that, trying combo isn't actually going to be a really enjoyable experience for me? How do I know that 5-MeO-DMT is going to, be a challenging or good experience, like based on what someone else told me? Like, that's not really, for me anyway, a good way to go through life. And I understand some people feel safer just kind of taking what someone else has done and figured out in life and going with it. And that's fine, right? Perfectly divine. It's all great spirits down for whatever, as Paul Chek says. But at the end of the day, like I find that the people I love the most are the people like, nah, let me see how hot that is. Another way I would say it is like the heretics, the people that are like, I'm going to do things differently just because it's what I feel is true to me. I mean, again, like I didn't have any friends growing up that, had an issue with working at these kind of jobs you get as a teenager and whatnot. And I definitely did. I found ways to teach guitar and do anything I could to make enough money that I didn't have to work a job, because it just felt like soul crushing to me. And I ended up forming a whole belief system that I had bad work ethic, that something must be wrong with me. And then, years later, when I gained some wisdom, I was like, oh, thank God I never bought into those myths too much. And thank God I just kept going on my own path, because it definitely has paid off for me. But it is interesting to see how those things happen over time, and to see how we shift, and to see like, where in life, like even if a stove is hot, like sometimes we got to figure out how hot it is for ourselves, so then we can share our experiences with other people. Because I think like if we think about, God and why God would even have an experiment like this whole world, I got to imagine it's because God is an adventurer, and even if God is in oneness, God's like, well, what's somethingness like, because again, any experience is valid in the eyes of creator. So I feel like that's if again, what I choose to believe, and I know you do too, because you already mentioned it, like if we're all God, then really we're all adventurers in disguise, so it makes perfect sense why so many of us want to try different things in life, and especially why people that want to try a lot of different things would find psychedelics, because there's no objective anything there. It puts you in the experience of like the statement of there is no objective reality. It actually allows you to experience that truth. It's really cool.
And one of the, and I forget the actual Bible quote. I'm sure someone out there knows it. But there is, it's even in a Bible quote of sorts, to become or remain close to God is to have the openness and curiosity of a child, to always have that childlike wonder, to always have that childlike curiosity. And so, even though that divinity, that divine is within us, we should always be curious to like learn something new and like figure something out, or like, just always be filled with wonder and awe and seeking to learn, just there's just always something new to learn, whether it's about yourself or about the world around you. And to be filled with wonder and awe and curiosity creates a magical landscape for you to traverse,
100%. You know, the quote that you were mentioning, I realized after you said it, that's like my favorite Bible quote. I don't know a lot of them. I've never read the whole Bible, but I am friends with Aaron. He tells me all the spark notes of the Bible. But it's, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must first enter the mind of a child, or some, semblance of that. And that is like so true. That's why I say follow the fun. Like, I think people may think I'm being a goofball when I say that, and I am. I'm a goofball at heart, but it's true. Like, based on what I found anyway, I don't pretend that it's objective reality. Maybe for someone it's not, but for me, like, every time I followed what's truly fun for me, like what's truly fun, what's truly rewarding, I always end up in the right places with the right people doing the right things for me. And my logical brain has no way to explain it, no way to explain how I got there, no way to understand how choosing that led to this. But I just, after a while, just can surrender and be like, well, it's done it every other time. What's to say I won't do it this time? And that amount of surrender, which wasn't easy for me as well. A lot of my astrological chart is Virgo, so it's like very structured and whatnot. But as I've let a lot of that go, it's really opened me up to a totally different, lease on reality that I can't imagine living my life without now. So it's really cool to think back to that time and, realize how trying to, take out the trying, the first 16, 17 years of my life, I was trying to be an adult. And then since then, I've been trying to get unadulterated, trying to come back to the mind of a child, but have the body of a man that can drive a car and do fun shit,
Right. That's the key here. And, I want to just throw out a quick reference to one of my favorite books that I recommend to almost everyone is Polishing the Mirror by Ram Dass. And have you read that one?
I have not. No, I'm going to write it down.
ASAP. Get that immediately and read it.
Perfect. I love book recommendations.
Mirror, Ram Dass. Anyway, he makes reference to that Bible quote in one of the segments, but it's just from cover to cover. It's such an amazing and beautiful book. And I use it in yoga classes for readings. I share it with clients. It's just, there's so many nuggets of wisdom in there. So highly recommend for anyone to pick that up and read it. In fact, I've bought so many copies of that book to give to people because I just need it to be in so many people's hands.
Yeah, that's how I feel about Disappearance of the Universe. It's amazing when you find a book like that just echoes through every fiber of your being. Mm-hmm. And I can always tell by how much I remember from a book too, because, I love reading books, but I kind of realized after time, some books I read and, they're not as interesting as others. And then some just take you over, and Disappearance was that for me. So anytime someone finds one like that, I'm like, yes, I'm going to download that. So Polishing the Mirror, I got that written down.
Yeah. First, I haven't read that. Sounds interesting.
Ooh, yeah. I think you'll love it because it's really this guy, Gary Renard, the author, and it's a true story. He lived in Maine and he started randomly getting visited by these two ascended masters. And he wasn't a very spiritual person before that. He had, tons of depression and anxiety in his life and things like that. And then he starts getting visited by these two ascended masters who were walking the planet at the same time Jesus was. And they start relaying all this stuff to him that is based on A Course in Miracles. So for anyone who hasn't read A Course in Miracles, it's a much easier way to understand what A Course in Miracles are. I mean, even Aaron, my buddy who teaches it, or my buddy Mark who teaches it, they're like, dude, the reason we love Disappearance is because people can read A Course in Miracles the entire way through and have no idea that it has to do with forgiveness. And so Disappearance it's kind of set in language of today, a little bit easier to understand. But what they talk about is, one of the things I love in there is they don't try to say this is the only path. And that for me grinds my gears so much when I go to some spiritual teacher, or I was a part of a certain organization for a couple of years that I got into because I love researching stuff. I love diving into different philosophies and whatnot. But what really started grinding my gears was when they tried to seem like they were the only path that could get you back to God. And oh, by the way, this path costs $100,000 to get there. I'm like, yeah, I'm good with that, Yeah, so, again, when I can read, it's just so silly, but when I can read books where they're like, hey guys, let's be real. There's a lot of ways to get back to God. There's infinite ways. What we believe is that A Course in Miracles and these teachings are maybe the quickest way to get back there. I was like, okay, I'm entertaining that. I can be open to that. Because again, and they say Buddhism is very similar. There's Buddhism is the closest besides A Course in Miracles, but they say the challenge, which is very interesting, And I feel like people like Ram Dass got this. There's been people on the planet while we've been alive that have understood this for sure. But when you hear about someone like a Jesus or a Buddha, these people are non-dualistic. They're completely back to oneness, even though they're appearing in the dream of separateness or somethingness. So at the end of the day, their whole thing is they're not going to buy into the dream. Other people's, limiting factors or whatever, they're not going to let that influence them. Their whole thing is, hey, follow the Holy Spirit or your higher self back to God. That's their whole thing. And so basically, like, what would happen is that someone like a Jesus or Buddha would be walking the planet. Most people would think they're fucking insane. They'd get killed, right? And then some amount of years later, someone would be like, I think that guy knew what he was talking about. Then, from a dualistic point of view, they try to create a religion out of it. And then, and that religion, a lot of people will get confused and whatnot. So, it's very interesting when they said all that in the book, because it made perfect sense to me. Because this whole thing of, there's good things, there's bad things, right? Or even I'm not a big fan of AA, because what does it do? It makes all the worldly pleasures seem more real. There's this real thing called alcohol, and it's really a thing, and you can never go back to it because you're powerless to it. It's like, I don't like those spells being cast around me. So I've chosen other paths for myself. But it helped me see kind of my own mindset of like, no, I'm taking the middle way. Like, that's been one of my core values for years. And that's the way that a non-dualist would look at it. One of the reasons Jesus drank wine is because he didn't let it consume him. So it wasn't a big deal for him to have a couple sips of wine at dinner. He didn't let it lead him into alcoholism, or he didn't think that if he had a sip, he wouldn't be enlightened. These are all dualistic points of view that are put on human beings that we take in, and then we think they're truth and gospel when they're not, because we're the dreamer. So whatever we dream into reality is the reality, but we haven't really understood that power yet. So we're still off-gassing on other people. Well, so-and-so says in Buddhism, we're not supposed to get intoxicated because XYZ. It's like, no, Buddha never would have said that, because that makes the dream real. That's someone who thought they understood what Buddha was saying, then trying to teach from a dualistic point of view, a non-dualistic teaching, So it's so interesting.
Wow. Yeah, for sure.
Fucking wild.
On that topic, can we segue?
Oh, yes. Let's segue. Segue. We're going to need an image of a Segway going by when that happens,
Who remembers what segue is? Yeah. So on that topic, there's so much talk in the. I'm coming back to ayahuasca for a moment.
No, please.
So much talk in the ayahuasca community of refraining from cannabis. At least for significant periods of time before sitting. And if you're someone who sits regularly, that means like you don't really get to smoke very often.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so there's these differences of opinions and thought processes on how one affects the other. And I'm still a little in the dark about it. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that. With respect to ayahuasca, I do normally try to refrain from cannabis for at least 3 to 5 days. I know they whoever they are, would prefer it be more like, a week to 2 weeks, but that's just not really feasible in my world. So anyway, I don't think that it affects my experience that much, but I'm not really 100% sure. But I can say I have gone very deep and have had very intense experiences. And I've also had lighter experiences, and some of that depends on the medicine. Some of that depends on the set and setting. And some of that depends on like how much I drink. Did I drink this much? Did I drink that much? Yeah. And did I drink once? Did I drink 3 or 4 times? So, and some of those times that I maybe had more to drink, I probably had a lesser experience as opposed to having, so I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? And again, like I've heard both sides of it, like the refrain from for as long as possible, and some that I've even experienced with the shaman smoking cannabis during the ceremony, not sharing with the participants, but, they themselves smoke. And, so I'm like, I'm sure it can be different for, there are just different thoughts about it, but I'm just curious, like, what's your thought on it? What have you heard about it?
Yeah. I love this question, because this is one of the main things that, people hit me up about, because I work in cannabis. So they're like, I'm going to do ayahuasca. Like, am I going to be bad? Am I going to be a bad child if I don't refrain from a month beforehand? I'm like, well, it depends. Do you believe you're going to be a bad child if you don't refrain for a month beforehand? Because if so, abracadabra, you just created the dream in which you're a bad kid for not refraining, right? Now, I do think that it makes sense to me why you'd want to overall do a detox and make sure you're being very conscious and aware of what you're putting into your body before you go sit with medicine. But to me, we can't have it both ways. And what I mean by that is that either cannabis is also a plant put here by God, and AKA it's divine, or it's not, right? So at the end of the day, I personally believe that God put this here for us to utilize, to remember ourselves, to come in a deeper union with our true selves, our higher selves, etc. And so at the end of the day, I think it comes down to personal responsibility, right? Like, are you someone who's smoking a lot and staying up late and playing video games? And because you stay up late and you play video games, you're eating shitty food. And because you eat shitty food, you wake up feeling like shit. And because you wake up feeling like shit, you're going to drink more coffee. Like, that's where it can get damaging. But that's no fault of cannabis, right? That's the patterns that people are playing out with it. I've talked intimately about this with Hamilton Souther, who, in my opinion, is like the best person to get this information from, because I'm no expert on ayahuasca, but he definitely is. I mean, he's drank over 10,000 times. So he's a good kind of, field tester of this. And he said the exact same thing. He was like, it all depends on what people believe. He said the reason that a lot of these traditions say refrain from cannabis, he's like, you got to understand, cannabis is not part of their culture. So for thousands upon thousands of years, they haven't included cannabis. So they're like, don't fix what's not broken. Just don't include it, because we don't really know about it. We know what's going to happen if you do exactly what we tell you to do and you drink the exact medicine we brew. We can have a good idea of what's going to happen. We know how to bring you back, things like that. But if you start adding other stuff into that equation, we're no longer experts on how to help you through that. So I think it makes a lot of sense based on lineage and things like that, why they would just say, just don't do it. I think a lot, it gets messy too in certain ways, because if you allow people to do it, are you going to get the kid that's like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to stay up till 3 a.m. and play video games and eat pizza rolls or whatever, like there's too much like confusion there, I think. But there's also the Santo Daime approach to ayahuasca, where they actually connect with cannabis while they're doing ayahuasca. And that's what Hamilton's a fan of. Hamilton, his way of putting it was, I'm a fan of it when it calls for it. He's like, he told me straight up, he was like, listen, man, when you come down here, he's like, yeah, you better believe we're going to hit a lot of buttons, because I know you can handle it. And I know you're going to be intentional and you're going to be conscious with it. And you also are aware of what can happen when you mix different medicines together. So you're going to take ownership over that if something really weird happens, Right. And at the end of the day, he said the same thing. He's like, listen, man, I believed that myth for a little while. And then I started meeting different shamans when I was in my training, and they were just like, where'd you get that idea? Like, we don't have any opinion around cannabis because it's just not part of our culture. And that's when he realized, oh, this isn't like, because the way it's purported is like, oh, these spirits don't dance well together and all this stuff. It's like, guys, that's human beings from their low level of consciousness of competitive nature and whatnot, projecting how plants would be based off of what they understand human nature to be. It's kind of like when people say aliens are going to come here and destroy the earth. It's like, guys, they're way more evolved than we understand. That's because our level of consciousness is still, and we must beat down the person that believes in something different. So we then project that out like, well, if we're that, they must be that. It's like, no, they're not that, So that's my feeling on it is, of course, be aware. If I was sitting with a practitioner who was like, hey, refrain, then I would, because I'm playing in their sandbox and I'm going to follow their rules based on the fact that I'm trusting them with my, my psyche and whatever. So I'm going to play in their box. But at the same time, that's kind of why I seek out people that are not like that. That's why I like Hamilton so much. That's why I like some other shamans I've met that are just like, hey, at the end of the day, like, you can mix anything. It just depends on it. Are you willing to go through what happens when you do? And are you also aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're looking to get from it? If so, then yeah, these medicines can dance beautifully together. But at the same time, there are things to be aware of. So that's my opinion on it personally.
For sure. Yeah, no, I agree. And same with, there are certain foods that you should not eat beforehand because they will absolutely counteract and contradict, So, and I do follow that, but I don't find that cannabis has that particular effect for me personally. But I also have a very deep and long sustained relationship with this medicine.
Oh yeah.
And, so anyway, I was just kind of curious.
No, it makes perfect sense too, because I mean, if you think about it this way, like, At the end of the day, I'll have so many people reach out to me. They're like, I get cannabis hangovers, and they attribute all these effects, right? Of like laziness or anxiety or paranoia. Those are like the top three. Or like I'm waking up with a hangover, or like I'm doing these things and they're blaming cannabis for it. And I'm like, I've never gotten any of that. Now, again, if I eat like a 200 milligram edible right before I go to bed, yeah, I'll wake up with a little bit of like, whoa, I'm still high. But I don't feel hungover at all. Like I don't feel like my frequency is lower. And so like typically I'll ask these people like, well, what's your diet like? Like how are you sleeping? All the basic questions. And 99% of the time, there's always an outlier, but 99% of the time, I'll get like, well, I went to bed at 2 a.m. and I only slept 4 hours, but that's normal for me. And I'm like, and you think cannabis is the thing giving you that feeling? Like, it's just like, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure that out. And again, it's probably different for everyone too, based on biochemistry and things like that. But yeah, like I think overall, like, if you think about all the things that they tell you to avoid with ayahuasca, animal products being one, cannabis being one, obviously any like antidepressants and pain pills and things like that. I think anything pharmaceutical is at the top of the list. Like definitely do not do that. That's actually like a danger. Like you could actually die with those interactions.
Right.
Animal products, that one is interesting for me too, because again, like I understand the myth, right? The theory that they have, which is like, hey, like everything you're connecting with has consciousness. So like if you're eating like traumatized things and things like that, you're going to have to go through their shit, which definitely feels real to me. But I also know the fact that like for me, I'm a polar type of metabolic typing diet. So I do not work well on a vegetarian diet. Now, if it's vegetarian with eggs and milk, I can do that just fine. I can do that fine. But also like I end up just really eating eggs and milk. I don't really do any of like the grains and whatever because a lot of them mess with my stomach. And maybe that's not grains. Maybe it's just the way they're grown in this country, even if they're organic, yada, yada. Because I understand if you go to Italy and whatnot, you don't get that effect. So there's a lot I don't know. But for me, one of my best friends, Jason Ganzuk, really amazing medicine worker as well. One of the smartest guys I've ever met. He's like, hey man, I've sat with ayahuasca 100 plus times. I sit with people through the experiences. I have a lot of different clients that literally have tried going vegetarian for a month beforehand. And he said it becomes like which is worse, right? Like if someone is going on a diet that's not right for their metabolic type, and so they're getting stressed out, they're malnourished, their mineral count is down, and now they're going to a foreign country where the diet's going to be different, the microbes are different, and their mineral content is down. So they don't have a lot of minerals from which to charge their mitochondria to create ATP. And now they're going to do a crazy medicine or a 3-day or 4-day ceremony that depletes their minerals farther. What is worse, that scenario or someone that maybe, has a little bit of milk or eggs or maybe even a little red meat, but make sure their minerals are up. So when they go down there, they're not like, trying to pour from an empty cup. So that's right. Like, I think where a lot of the intricacies are. And I think that's the challenge I've had with some of the different, centers out there that are like, nope, this is the way to do it for everyone. And I'm like, that can't be accurate based on what I understand from quantum physics, that there is no objective reality. So for me, I always say like to people, or for myself anyway, I just say like, do your best, forget the rest, like at the end of the day, do your best to follow the guidelines, but also like be true to yourself. Like if you're feeling like malnourished as hell, if you're feeling like you're getting sick or whatever, and you understand that milk will help you or eggs will help you or whatever, just do your best, make sure you're getting an organic, pasture raised. These animals, if you're going to eat them, they had a beautiful life up until the moment the bow was pulled or whatever like that. That's going to be much different than like eating store-bought meat, for sure, but again, like I said, like if I'm playing in their sandbox, I always do my best to follow what they say because I respect their lineage. I'm not going to go out there and be like, I know better than them or whatever. But that's why I found that I really enjoy shamans like Hamilton that are like, yeah, man, be true to yourself. Like if you know what works well for you, just do your best, get the best quality of everything. Make sure you're sleeping really good. Make sure you got positive relationships in your life. Like make sure like your foundation is solid, and the rest shouldn't matter all too much. So that's my theory on it.
Yep. And if you're someone who sits with medicine with any sort of regularity, you should be kind of living your life in a way that's conducive to having medicine at the drop of a hat, because life is a ceremony, and this is how we prepare for everything that we do.
100%. I totally agree. And Sofiya, this has been amazing. I can't believe we already blew through an hour. It feels like 10 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, we were in a flow state. I want to make sure I can keep talking to you for 3 more hours. We got to do a round 2. Hopefully we'll get to do one in person when we get to meet up and give each other a big hug in person. But
Yeah,
I want to make
please.
sure, yeah, I'm so excited, but I want to make sure I give you ample opportunity to tell people where they can find you. I know you have some different offerings as well. You have a whole apothecary you run. You've sent me some of your products, which are fan-flippin-tastic, by the way. The
Thanks.
CBD you sent,
Got those.
everything you sent was so amazing. And I highly recommend to anyone who's looking for some really love-grown things and to be able to supercharge your space, you know, especially if you're doing medicine in your space and these kind of things. Sofiya's got so many amazing things to offer. So where can I send people to find out more information on that and for them to connect with you?
Well, probably the easiest is I have 2 websites. My first website would be the easiest to access all of that information, which is alchemyincensela.com. You have to denote the LA because we're in Louisiana.
I was like, wait a minute, is that Los Angeles? You know, I was like, did you used to live in LA before? And then I remember it's Louisiana. Yeah.
The big
That
LA.
makes sense. Yeah.
And then my other website is risingphoenixla also .com, which features a lot more of my services and offerings in that realm. The Alchemy Incense LA is more about the products that we curate and cultivate. But I make ceremonial cacao, which is a recipe I worked on for a couple of years while making cacao for ceremonies, and then I started marketing it because people liked it so much. I make Amazonian Sananga, which are the medicinal eye drops, which is a beautiful medicine I really developed a relationship with and then learned how to make, and I actually make and serve that medicine quite a bit. And then my business partner and I have an abundance of gardens where we grow as much as we can organically, and we make organic herbal teas, medicinal teas, incense, hand-rolled, prayed over Reiki-infused incense for an assortment of things. We also teach incense classes, workshops on how to make your own incense, and we do little incense kits. So we made a how-to video so you can order a kit and do it yourself at home if you can't come to us. Yeah, and then pre-rolled smoke blends as well as just the loose blends themselves. I like the loose blends personally because then you can mix in your own other herbs of choice.
Yes.
Which is my preferred way. And that's actually one of the things I love to offer is I do a sacred smoke ceremony, which is involving one of the herbal blends and usually infused with cannabis, but sometimes not. But yeah, and then I do shamanic healing sessions which are a blend of, it's an intuitive blend of acupressure, energy work, sound healing, chakra alignment, and yeah, it's just kind of a mixed bag of what you need that day and what's going to come through. There may be some light language involved. I will probably do a tobacco prayer and a shakapa clearing as part of that practice. Anyway, yeah, and I'm just available for sound healing sessions, private ceremonies. I serve combo, and I also serve the Sacred Toad Medicine of Mexico, which I will not say the name of.
Yes.
And,
Sat with that a couple times myself.
Yeah, such a beautiful, magical medicine. Have a very deep relationship with that as well, and have been to the Sonoran Desert in Mexico to study with the Seri tribe to really learn to work with that and be served by them and understand their process. And so incredible. Anyway, I could go on about all that for hours. So.
Oh my God.
We'll have to talk again soon.
Yes, I love that. And, you know, again, like I have one question that I love asking everyone at the end, and I'm going to ask you now. And that question is, let's say someone listens to this episode and they're really excited at the idea to check out psychedelics and apply them to their own life. What is the one piece of advice you would suggest to them or be able to offer to them to allow them to use the proper discernment in understanding if these medicines are right for them at this particular time in their lives?
First of all, regarding any particular medicine, I would really tap into, are you being called or are you being pressured by someone? Are you being called? And if so, sit with that and really listen to that call. You know, I was called by ayahuasca, but it took me 5 years to actually move forth on that. So yeah, really listen to it and don't just succumb to go into some ceremony because your friends are going.
Yeah.
Like, go because you are called to experience that medicine for healing or for whatever it is that you're looking for. So the other bit of advice I would really recommend on that is research who's serving you. There are a lot of fly-by-night people who don't really know what they're doing, who are brewing medicines up in their kitchen without really knowing proper protocols. And it's sometimes you might be okay with that, but there are a lot of things that can go wrong. And so I really highly recommend knowing who is serving your medicine and getting information on them from people who have experienced their work before, and check them out. There are a lot of things that can go wrong or be handled inappropriately in a ceremony that is not properly contained and not properly facilitated. And that sort of a situation can cause more damage than good.
Oh, yeah.
So really want to be make sure that your server has integrity and knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the most important piece of advice out there, especially in today's world. I know a lot of people have the best of intentions, or at least I hope to believe that, in wanting to go out there and be of service. But it's kind of like this. It's like, if you haven't learned to deadlift 400 pounds yourself, or you've only done it once, you probably shouldn't be coaching other people on how to deadlift 400 pounds. Like, there are certain things you're going to want to go do. There's degrees you might want to get or things like that for the weightlifting side. For this, you're going to want to learn from certain lineage holders, certain things that are really important to understand in working in the medicine. You'll want to understand how to hold space. You'll want to understand how to deal with trauma that comes up and all different sorts of things. So I love that piece of advice, Sofiya.
And you want to know how to handle medical emergencies that come up.
Yes, 100%.
That is critical. So because it happened. It
really can.
Know who's serving you.
Yeah. Truer words have never been spoken. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Sofiya is such a gem. We're definitely going to be doing more rounds. Make sure you check out the show notes where all the websites that she listed, along with her Instagram and everything, is going to be connected. So you can go check it out, send her a message, tell her how much you love the episode. And if you guys did love the episode, we'd love a 5-star review. It keeps the show reaching new listeners just like you, which we are so grateful for. So wherever you guys are in the world, I hope you're all having the best day ever. And always remember, may the source be with you. Peace for now.